And don't be shy, of course. Okay, so um, the sukkah. Why do we sit in the sukkah? We mentioned this in the past. We sit in the sukkah because God placed us in the sukkah when we left Egypt. Okay. Um, why specifically do we celebrate the sukkah during this time of the year? In other words, if we are celebrating the sukkah because we left Egypt, then why wouldn't it be more appropriate to sit in the sukkah in the time when we left Egypt, which is which would be a Passover. In other words, maybe perhaps we should actually have our Seder in the sukkah. That would actually make a lot of sense. Instead, we do the sukkah in the season of the fall, 6 months after the actual Exodus. So this is a problem that's been going on for a while. So there's a medrash gives an answer, and the medrash's answer is very practical but also very technical. Says the medrash, indeed, it would in fact be more appropriate to sit in the sukkah in the month of Nisan, in the month of the spring, in the month of the Exodus. The problem, however, is that in the month of the spring, everybody is going outside and living in huts. That's what you do if you're living in the Middle East. It can get very hot. You go out of the house. There's no air conditioning. You go out of the house and you sit in your hut. That's what you do. So if the Jewish people would go outside and eat the matzah in the hut, everybody would say, of course, you're eating matzah in the hut because it's more comfortable, because it's better weather, etc. Nobody will notice that we're eating outside because of the mitzvah. Therefore, says the Medrash, God says, you know what? Let's wait until everybody starts taking down their summer huts. Everybody is calling in the people to carry in the summer furniture. And then the Jewish people, specifically when everybody's coming inside, we choose to go outside. That is something that is recognizable and clear that it is because of the mitzvah. That's the Medrash's answer, which is a very nice answer. But that cannot be the full answer because that sounds just like it's a technicality. In other words, it's just that people should not make the mistake. But once you go into the realm of the Kabbalah and the Hasidic philosophy, there has to be something deeper, whereas there has to be an inherent connection between the concept of a sukkah and the concept of, and the period of time we are in, 6 months after Passover, in the time of the time of Sukkot. So this is something that we mentioned before many times, just briefly. Sukkot is the time that everything that we experienced on the high holidays in an abstract form, in a spiritual way, actually comes into the real world and becomes concrete in Sukkot. So we mentioned this before, the concepts of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have to be reflected in the Sukkah because that's what the Sukkah is. Now, this is based on a verse from King David's book of Psalms. And the verse reads as follows: Tiku b'chodesh shofar, b'keseh liyom chagenu. The verse reads, the translation is that blow on the month a shofar, b'keseh, when it's concealed, when it's covered, the day of our holiday. And what do I know? What do I make of this verse? Blow in the month of the shofar, in the concealment when it's covered, the day of our holiday. This is a poetic verse, but it's not clear. So the first question you have on this verse is which month? Right? King David is he should be more clear. He says blow on the 7th month. So the Talmud says as follows. The Talmud says that what King David is telling us is blow on the month. Which month? First of all, the Hebrew word chodesh is month. Chodesh also means renewal of the moon. And says the Talmudic interpretation says that which month, which holiday are we referring to? We're referring to the holiday where the moon is concealed. And we mentioned this before. We mentioned that Rosh Hashanah, that both Sukkot and Passover, as well as Shavuot, all other Jewish holidays occur in the middle of the month. Passover and Shavuot and Sukkot is the middle of the month. I don't know about tonight, but last night I was outside putting up the schach. What a beautiful moon, because it's almost the 15th, so the moon is almost full. And tonight there's going to be a full moon. I'm not sure if we're going to see it because of the clouds, but certainly there's going to be a full moon tonight. Even Shavuot is a half a moon. Rosh Hashanah is the only day that the only holiday that the moon is concealed. Either you don't see the moon at all, or you just see a sliver. So the Talmud says, when King David says, blow shofar in the month, which month? We're talking about Rosh Hashanah. How do you know? How does it alluded to by King David? King David says, blow it bakese, in the concealed of the day of our holiday. Meaning, according to the Talmud, blow it on the day where the moon is concealed. Okay, fine. That's still a very roundabout way of saying what you want to say. Just say blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, the Kabbalah says, the Hasidic philosophy says, there's a deeper meaning in this verse. And the meaning of the verse is as follows. Tiku b'chodesh shofar. You blow the shofar in the 7th month. Now here comes the key. Bakese. Literally, kesa means concealed, the day of our holiday. So bakesa is concealed. Day is revelation, right? The day is when the sun shines, when there's revelation. So the verse essentially says, in the concealed, the day of our holiday. Meaning to say, concealed revelation holiday. That's what it says. Bakesa, the concealed, liyoim, the day, which means revelation, holiday. Says the Kabbalistic interpretation, that which was concealed in the beginning of the month when you blew the shofar expresses itself in a revealed way in Sukkot. Bakese, that which was concealed, is Liyom Chagenu, on the day of our holiday it becomes like day, it becomes revealed. And therefore, that's the opening for the Kabbalah and the Hasidic philosophy to explain how every dimension and every aspect of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that exist in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur express themselves in the holiday of Sukkot as well. And in fact, in Sukkot, it becomes expressed and it becomes revealed in the real world. Okay, so let's begin with what we said in the past, and then we'll add. So what we said in the past is that let's talk about God's love to the people. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we don't feel the love. We feel judgment. But the truth of the matter is that God's love exists. God judges us and forgives us. So even though he's in the state of attribute of judgment, but beneath the judgment is love. And we discussed this many times, that sometimes beneath the judgment, the left side, the judgment sometimes has greater love than open and revealed love. But that's another story. But judgment, when we stand before God in judgment on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we don't feel loved. We feel judged. And it's not the same feeling. Now, beneath the judgment is the love. How do we know? Because he judges us compassionately and he forgives. But the process of forgiving is evaluating what we have done, evaluating where we stand, and then forgiving us. So there is a concept of love, but the love is not felt. On Sukkot, the love is felt. How is it felt? That's joy. Joy is we feel the love. And the Kabbalists explain, I believe it's based on the Arizal, that he says if you look at the dimensions of the Sukkah, so everybody knows the Sukkah has 4 walls. But if you look at the Mishnah, you see that the minimum size of the Sukkah, in other words, the minimum amount of walls is the Sukkah has to have 2 complete walls and then a little bit of a third. That's the law. Says the Arizal, why are we talking about 2.5 walls? So he says a very beautiful metaphor. When you have an embrace, when you embrace somebody with your arm, there's really 3 parts of your arm. There's from your shoulder from the shoulder until the elbow. That's part number 1. And then you have from the elbow to the wrist is part number 2. And then from the wrist until the actual hand is part number 3. So if you think about it, and they have the first two parts are longer, and the second half is shorter, right? From the shoulder to the elbow, and from the elbow to the wrist is like the two walls, and then the hand from the wrist to the fingernails is 2.5. And the idea of sitting in the sukkah is you're sitting in the embrace of God. You're literally sitting, and you, instead of being wrapped around by the walls of the sukkah, you are being wrapped around in the walls of the sukkah. But what that represents is being wrapped around by the embrace of Hashem. So the embrace was there too. I mean, the love was there too in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it was not felt, and it's felt clearly and explicitly in the sukkah. So that's one idea. The sukkah is the expression of the love of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's judgment. What on the surface is judgment, and the love is beneath the surface. And and after the forgiveness, the love bursts. The love and the joy that comes along with the love bursts forward from the beneath the surface to the surface, and that's what we celebrate for a full week's time. That is the first interpretation that we say many times, and I think I even said it this year. So that's the first point. Now we move on. Now we elaborate. So if you look at the sukkah, a big theme in the sukkah is the theme of peace. Why is it peace? What divides people? We live in a capitalistic society. What divides people? Possessions divide people. Don't worry, I'm for property rights, and the Torah is for private property. But the bottom line is that possessions divide people. You have more, I have less. We have homes, we build walls, we don't let people in. That's just the way the world works. There's division. What is sukkah? Sukkah is a place where it's temporary. It's out of our doors. The walls are not concrete. People can come in. It's a time and place where people can get together. Which is why, because the sukkah represents the concept of achdut, of unity, which is why, technically speaking, the Talmud says that all the Jewish people can actually sit in one sukkah. What does that mean? It means if you look at the dimensions of the sukkah, there's a maximum and minimum dimension of the height, but there's no maximum dimension, and there's a minimum of dimension of the width and the breadth. We discussed that, I think, on Wednesday. It cannot be more than it can't be less than 7 tefachim, 7 hand breadths, the width and the length. So the height has a maximum and minimum dimension. The width and the breadth have a minimum dimension, but not a maximum dimension. Technically speaking, you could make the sukkah many miles long. That's what you can do if you want. Why? So the Talmud derives it from a verse. The verse says, Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkot. All the residents of Israel will dwell in a sukkah. It says the Talmud, all of Israel. It says all. All of Israel, all the residents of Israel will dwell in sukkahs. Says the Talmud, this teaches that all of Israel could sit in the same sukkah. In other words, theoretically, if you build the sukkah as wide enough, you can have every Jewish person in the same sukkah together. And if you look at the scripture, or in the prayers, we always refer to the sukkah of peace. The sukkah is the cover that brings us all in under its shadow. That represents the concept of peace and unity. So the fact that we're coming together to perform the mitzvah together, that is the sukkah. That is the sukkah. If you think about it, most mitzvot I can't do together with you the same moment. We both cannot light the same Shabbos candle at the same moment. We can't put on tefillin. We can't put on the same pair of tefillin at the same moment. But sukkah, we can all keep the same sukkah and the same mitzvah at the same time all together. Okay, so that's one theme of unity. Then there's another theme of unity which we didn't discuss yet, but we discuss it every year, and that is that the mitzvah of the first day, for the mitzvah of Sukkot, a mitzvah of Sukkot is to take 4 kinds of vegetation and tie them together, or tie 3 of them together and shake them. We call it the Daled Minim, the 4 species, and that's the lulav, the palm, the etrog, the citron, the hadas, the myrtle, and the arava, the willow. And this also says the Medrash represents unity because you're taking four different species, and the Medrash points out what they represent. Each one has a quality, and that the other doesn't have. So one has both good deeds and Torah study. One has only Torah study. One has only good deeds. One represents none of these qualities. And yet the mitzvah is to take all types of people together and unite them. And only when you have all four could you make the blessing. So it represents unity. Now, if we had the time, we can actually go a little deeper and explain how not only are we taking four species and uniting the four species, but actually every species within those four represent unity. So what do you have about the lulav? So lulav, people ask you on the street, and you stop someone and say, you want to shake the lulav? They say, what's a lulav? You say, it's a palm tree. It's a palm branch. And they look at you like you're crazy because they've never seen a palm branch that's closed. They have the picture of the palm branches that are open. So the Talmud, in fact, says that the Torah uses the term kapot tmarim. Kapot can mean branches, but kapot can also mean from the word kafut, tied. In other words, the Talmud derives from that verse that you have to take the palm branches, before they separate, when they're still tied together. Why do they have to be tied together? That is the symbol of unity within the palm. Then you have the most interesting one is about an etrog. The Talmud says that the etrog is unique among fruits or this type of fruits. Again, there may be others, I don't know. But this is a unique feature of the etrog. And it's actually one of the reasons, one of the explanations of the word that the Torah uses to describe the etrog. So if you look at the Torah doesn't say etrog. The Torah says, take a beautiful fruit. What's a beautiful fruit? I don't know. There are many beautiful fruits. So can I go to Whole Foods and pick up any beautiful fruit? So the tradition is, the oral tradition says, no, it's an etrog. It's specifically the etrog fruit, the citron fruit. And we have that tradition going back all the way to Joshua and Moses. But why does the Torah refer to it as pre-eitz hadar, a beautiful fruit? Why doesn't the Torah just say an etrog? So there are many, many interpretations of the Talmud linking the etrog to the word hadar, beautiful. Hadar is one of the ways of saying beautiful in Hebrew. And one interpretation is that it's called hadar. Hadar can also mean, comes to the word dar, is to live. In Hebrew, a dira is an apartment or a home. So ladur is to live. So why is this called a beautiful fruit? It can also mean the fruit that lives. What does it mean it lives? Says the Talmud, it lives on the tree for all four seasons. Most trees, most fruit have a certain season when they grow. And if you leave them on the tree too long, it's going to rot and fall off the tree. The etrog fruit is unique in the sense that it actually benefits and grows from all the four seasons. So in other words, here is a fruit that encompasses and unites all the four different seasons of the year and unites them all and flourishes from those specifically because it has the diversity of seasons. So the etrog unites the diverse seasons. And then you have the hadas, the myrtle. The definition of the myrtle, to make the myrtle kosher, says the Talmud, you need to have three leaves stemming from the same stem. That's unique about the myrtle. Usually every leaf has its own stem. The myrtle, you look at your hadas, every stem, three leaves come from the same stem. Again, a concept of unity out of the three. And then you have arvei nachal, willows of the brook. Says the Talmud, we're talking about, it's called willows of the brook, and the Talmud describes them as gedalim ba'achva. They grow in brotherhood. In other words, they grow together. You don't have one willow. They're all growing together as unity. Fine. So both the sukkah, which is the concept of everybody sitting together in the sukkah doing the mitzvah together. And like we said, to the extent that really all Israel could fit in the same sukkah. And sukkah represents the sukkah of peace. That's unity. And then we make up the next morning. This year, by the way, we don't shake the four kinds on the first day because it's Shabbos. So even though biblically speaking, we would have to shake the lulav on Shabbat, just like we would have to hear the shofar on Shabbat, but there's a rabbinic decree, and therefore we don't shake the lulav on Shabbat. The first time to shake the lulav this year is going to be Sunday. But in any case, both the sukkah and the four species represent unity. and not just unity. We always point this out in the Kabbalah. There's a fine line. There's a distinction between unity and singularity. Singularity means there's only one. And if there's only one, if I'm the only one home, it's very easy for me to keep the peace. That's not what unity is. And that's not what the unity of Sukkah and the four kinds represents. Unity, we're talking about this specifically diversity. Every species has its own dimension. Every species has its own characteristics. And yet we don't wipe away the characteristics, but they coexist and they actually flourish and enhance each other. And that's the four species. Each one adds to the other. And then as we mentioned, within each one of the four species, you also have a concept of multiplicity coming together, as we mentioned. The many branches tied together, many seasons, that's space. Then you have many seasons in one etrog, that's time. And then you have three stems coming from three leaves from the same stem. And then you have many different willows growing together in brotherhood. Okay, it's fine. So it's a beautiful concept. All the rabbis like talking about it because unity, who doesn't like unity? Everybody likes unity. Okay, what does unity have to do with the first half of the month? What does unity have to do with the beginning of the month, which is the idea of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? And like I said, at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the concept happens, whatever we're trying to achieve happens in the abstract. I don't mean abstract is the wrong word. Happens in the spiritual sense. But when is it in the tangible sense? What we achieved on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the spiritual sense becomes tangible on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, on Sukkot. So the unity of Sukkot expressed with the four kinds and the Sukkah is somehow or another, that is making the ideas of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur more tangible. So how does Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, what do they have to do with unity? That's the question. And the answer, of course, is that again, there's two major seasons of the year, as we mentioned in the past. There's Passover and there's Rosh Hashanah. Passover, we're righteous. What do I mean? We're like tzaddikim. Again, there's two paths. The tzaddik and the Baal Teshuvah. The person who never sinned and the person who sinned and then returns to God. Now, which one is better? So of course, the tzaddik is more spiritual. The tzaddik is holier. The tzaddik never sinned. But you know what the Talmud says? The Talmud says is that if someone is a Baal Teshuvah, someone sins, and then someone returns to God, so they're actually a higher level than the tzaddik and the person who never sinned. So there's basically two ways of serving God. One way of serving God is we're pure, we're innocent. That's what happens Passover. It's the beginning. Beginnings, it's like the first day of school. All the kids are motivated to learn on the first day of school. I had a terrible teacher once, and he said the problem with the first month of school is even the children who are ungifted want to learn. So it makes it hard for the teacher. That teacher should be fired. But you get the point. The point is it's the beginning. We're all fresh. We have not been challenged yet. We have not failed yet. We have not faced any frustration. That's the tzaddik. That's Passover. What happens Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is a time of teshuvah. It's a time of return. It's a time that we overcome the tension and the distance. So in other words, it doesn't have to mean I sinned as I robbed a bank, but even someone who never sinned, they still have the concept of teshuvah. The concept of teshuvah is that I feel distant, I feel apart from God, because when my soul was up in heaven, it was close to God. When I come down into this earth, I feel a distance and I feel the longing. And we know that feeling the longing actually has an advantage over the person who does not feel distant because he's close to God, because the longing brings with it a deeper intensity and a deeper passion, and therefore the person who feels distant, in fact, if he knows how to focus that feeling of distance, of longing, could actually have a deeper intensity in his relationship with God, because he's running away from the distance, he's yearning to come close. So Rosh Hashanah and Yom, so Passover is, we are in love, we are in our honeymoon, we fell in love, and we cannot even imagine being distant from Hashem. That's what Passover is. We spoke about this yesterday, and we follow God blindly into the desert. What does it mean we follow God blindly into the desert? It means we're like young people in love. We're not using rationale. We feel one, we feel connected. Whatever you're going to do, that's where I'm going to go. And that's a beautiful thing, but that's Passover. Then what is Sukkot? What is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is we feel distant. And then we do something interesting. The distance actually fuels our reuniting. There's a verse in Isaiah where God says, Shalom, peace, in other words, hello, la rachok, to the one who's far, vela karov, and to the one who's close. So God is saying peace. In other words, welcome back to those who are far and to those who are close. So of course the question is, why does God first say hello to the person who's far? And if he's far, then how could Hashem say hello? Hello, you say when the person is face to face, when the person is close to you. So the Medrash says, what Isaiah says, God says hello to the far one who became close. That is what's interesting to God. In other words, the feeling of teshuvah, the feeling that I was distant, and then I overcame that distance and I came close. Not only I overcame that distance, but that distance actually fueled my coming close. That is what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is all about, and that is what Passover is not. Passover, we feel close to God to begin with. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we already lived life. The honeymoon is over. We experience the tension. We experience the distance. We don't always see with God, eye to eye with God. So we're distant. But Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is a time to leverage that distance to become closer. Because again, the distance has tension, and that tension could become intensity. And that intensity brings us closer to God. So says the Hasidic philosophy. I read this in the discourse that this morning that the Rebbe said on a day before Sukkot in the year 1972. Says like this, he says that, so what is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is unity, not singularity, unity. We take two things that are distinct and we bring them together. Who's distinct? Us and God. We're distant, we're not the same. And yet those two things that are distant become close. Like Isaiah said, La rachok, the distant become close. So that's the theme of unity. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is the theme of unity, uniting those perspectives that are apart and are separate. So by Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we do it within our heart, within our soul. Sukkot, that theme of unity comes in the tangible, real world. Here you see that the concept of unity, of our reuniting with ourselves, with our true selves, reuniting with God also helps us reunite with the God that's in the other person. And that's why the unity permeates all aspects of our life. In the Sukkah, how we reunite with other people, as well as in the four kinds that are, again, four distinct kinds uniting, and more specifically, each kind individually has a built-in concept of unity, of diversity coming together. So that's the story in short. It's already 10:32. Just to summarize quickly, we talked about how the Sukkah represents unity, the four kinds represent unity, and why does unity have anything to do with the first half of the month? Because the first half of the month is the concept of unity. What does it mean, unity? Again, in the Kabbalistic interpretation, unity as opposed to singularity is that there's diversity that unites. In other words, distinction that come together to enhance each other. And that's the idea of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, where we feel distant from Hashem. And that distance fuels the closeness. We were distant, we became close. We created the unity out of the distance. And that concept of unity expresses itself when we sit in the sukkah with other people, when the unity permeates every aspect of our life, and when we see that the different aspects that the different people possess is it's not an attack on ourselves. The other person's perspective is not an attack on your perspective. In fact, if you know how to navigate, it could actually enhance your perspective, and the unity can bring a much deeper experience and a much richer life. Again, the diversity, the unifying the diverse perspectives can bring a much richer life. This is the story in short. A lot more to say, of course. If anybody has any comments or questions, please share. Otherwise, have a wonderful day and a wonderful holiday, and of course, the joyous holiday, because the main theme of Rosh Hashanah of Sukkot is joy, because it's called Zman Simchatenu, the season of our joy, because tied into what we said earlier, that revelation, that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is introspection, but when that expresses itself, it brings about that joy. So I hope everybody has a very joyous holiday, and we should meet very soon in good health. Study more Torah, do more mitzvot, and do good more and do more good